Okay, thank you, Manju. First of all, thank you for the invitation. I'm very sorry not to be physically here with you. I hope that you will have a nice program here in Bangalore. I wanted to give a course. If can you hear me properly, or you want? Okay, so I wanted to give a course on trace methods in random matrix theory. So it's a kind of old-fashioned, as we will see, trace methods were the first methods introduced in random matrix theory. They are kind of old-fashioned, but there have been some recent developments which I thought were worth of interest, at least worth of for at least a course. Okay. So let's start. So very slowly. So H will always be an n by n Hermitian matrix. So you know from the spectral theorem that your matrix has an orthonormal basis of eigenvectors, and we will denote by lambda I the eigenvalues of this matrix. Okay, so the eigenvalues are real. The spectrum are the sets of eigenvalues, and for Hermitian matrices, the operator norm, maybe I can use, the operator norm coincides with the spectral radius, the largest eigenvalue in absolute value. Okay, right. So our goal is to study the eigenvalues, and I will not mention results about eigenvectors, even if it's possible, but I will stick for simplicity to eigenvalues. So our goal is to study eigenvalues. When you do not have direct access to an eigenvalue, to your eigenvalues, probably the nice idea that you can have is to try to study trace. Okay, so you take any analytic function, and when you compute the trace of this function, you recover of f of h is the same as looking at the sum of the f of lambda i's. Okay, so if you think about this formula, it connects the sum of f of h taken on the diagonal. It connects geometric information. Okay, something that you can compute or try to estimate. It's just trying to estimate matrix entries, and another information which is the sum of the f of lambda I, which are linear statistics of the eigenvalues. Okay, and for good choice, for if you choose carefully your function f, you can try to you can access to essentially all information you want on the lambda i's, provided that you can estimate this trace for these functions. Okay, so as we will see in many matrix problems, for good test functions, you can estimate or compute or bound these traces. Okay, so that's what this course will be about. And as I said already, I will not mention that, but so if you take the trace, you will cover information on the eigenvalues, but if you can have estimates on individual entries of the eigenvalues from the spectral theorem, you can infer back information on the eigenvector basis of the matrix H as well. But I will not insist on that in this course. Okay, so there are two canonical choices of function f that you can look at. The first one are just powers, or more generally polynomials. Okay, and so from the expansion of the matrix, the coefficient xy of your matrix h to the k can be written as the sum of products of entries, and the sum is over all k plus 1 tuples, which you can interpret as paths of length k from one point to another. Okay, so this combinatorial interpretation, which this is the one we will use. Okay, so the powers are just counting paths, weighted paths in your matrix. The other canonical choice is to take f of lambda, which is lambda minus z minus 1, because then f of h is nothing else than the resultant of your matrix, estimated at z. Okay, so the two are closely related. For example, you can see that the resultant if you expand the 1 over lambda minus z minus 1 formally, you will obtain that the resultant is nothing else than the generating function of the powers. Okay. But the way to study these two objects, powers and resultants, is usually quite different. Even if at the end they contain essentially the same information. Okay, so in random matrix theory, when you deal with a non-integrable system, meaning that when you do not have a direct access to the law of the eigenvalues, people have either studied resultants or study powers like polynomials. Okay, so the resultant studies are made thanks to analytical and probabilistic methods, and polynomials, as we will see, relies more on combinatorial arguments. And I said that powers are kind of old-fashioned because in the standard random matrix models, the resultant methods have been proved to be much more powerful than the type of result that you could obtain with polynomials. Okay. So, as we will see in this course, the goal is to look at these powers of polynomials, powers of matrices for two types of matrices. So the Wigner matrices, which are Hermitian matrices whose entries are independent above the diagonal, and what I call here a uniform regular, which are matrices that you can obtain, for example, like from uniform matrices that you can form from uniform permutation matrices or from adjacent symmetrics of random regular graphs and things like that. So we will see that this second ensemble of matrices, we will see them in the last two courses. We will start with the simpler case of Wigner matrices. Okay, but before going into the details of the models, I thought it could be interesting just to have an overview of how do you use information of the powers to deduce results, basic results on the eigenvalues. Okay, so the first object that people study is the empirical distribution of the eigenvalues. So it has many names, also on ESD, empirical spectral distribution, spectral measure, density of states, and so on. So this is a measure which is just an empirical measure of the eigenvalues, okay, as its name suggests. So connecting to traces, when you take from the spectral theorem, if you take the trace of f of h, you retrieve, you have nothing else than the integral of f against your empirical distribution of eigenvalues. Okay, so then you have basic questions. So we'll be interested in matrices of size n, and n will be a parameter which will be not written explicitly, but it will be present everywhere. So n will go to infinity. And the first basic question is also, do we have a convergence of the empirical distribution of eigenvalues as n goes to infinity, for example, for the topology of weak convergence? So if the sequence of matrices is random, then we will mean by that weak convergence, but the weak convergence with all improbability of almost surely, depending on whether or not your convergence of a test function is almost surely or improbability. And the second basic question is, do you have convergence of the operator norms, or do you have more generally convergence of the left and right edges of the support, meaning the largest and the smallest eigenvalues? Okay. So how does the trace method try to solve these two questions? So the first question, convergence of the empirical distribution of eigenvalues, will be done thanks to the method of moments, which is a classical method in probability. So you consider a probability measure which has all moments finite. Okay, I will denote them by mu k. You say that this measure is uniquely characterized by its moments if it is a unique measure with exactly this moment sequence, right? Okay, so what kind of measures are uniquely characterized by their moments? There is one criterion which is cheap, easy to get, is this one. Assume that the moments grow like ak power k. Okay. Then, using the Stirling formula, it's easy to see that the Fourier transform of the measure is analytic in a neighborhood of 0. Okay, so the neighborhood will be essentially 1 over a. Okay, so in particular, since the Fourier transform characterizes a measure, it will imply that your measure mu is uniquely characterized by its moments under this growth condition of the moments. So this condition, it contains all measures of bounded support, sub-Gaussians, meaning distribution which have a tail which is lighter than a Gaussian distribution, and sub-exponential variables, and which match exactly. So, if you take an exponential variable with parameter 1, it's you will see that its moments grows like k power k. But there is a finer criterion which is called Kerleman's condition, which is harder to prove, which says that a measure mu is uniquely characterized by its moments if the following series diverge. Okay. But we will not use the refinement of Kerleman's condition because we will deal only with measures with bounded support. Okay. So once you know that your measure is uniquely characterized by its moment, the method of moments in probability theory tells you the following. You take mu n, a sequence of probability measures. If all the moments of if the limit of the case moments of the mu n converge to the case moment of mu, where we recall mk is the case moment of mu, then mu n converges weakly to mu. Okay, so the proof, if you have never seen that, I'll leave you as an exercise. It's not hard. And the consequence for us, in terms of random matrices, is what we can call the trace method. It says that if you have a sequence of matrices H such that the normalized trace of H power k converge to mk, where mk are the moments of uniquely characterized measures which is uniquely characterized by its moment, then the empirical distribution of eigenvalues converge to mu weakly. Okay. If you have questions, do not hesitate to stop me, or if it's too slow, too fast. So now that we have seen more or less how to estimate the empirical spectral distribution thanks to trace of powers, I will explain you how to control also the operator norm. So if you take an even number k, you have the following inequalities which connect the trace of h to the k to the operator norm of h. Okay, so the right hand side is simply the fact that the trace of h power k is the sum of the k's power of the eigenvalues. And the left-hand side is simply that all eigenvalues are bounded by the operator norm in absolute value. So in particular, if k is much larger than log n, then n power 1 over k goes to 1, and you get that the operator norm is equivalent to the trace of h power k normalized power 1 over k. Okay, so if you have information on the trace of h power k where k is large, large meaning larger than log n, then you can automatically deduce the statements about the operator norm. How does it work in practice? Assume that you have already proved that your empirical spectral distribution, mu h, converges weakly to a probability measure mu. Okay, such that the support of mu is is contained in the let's say is exactly the segment BA, and B is less than A. Okay. Then since A is in the support, mu has put a positive mass on the interval A minus infinity plus A minus epsilon plus infinity. Due to the fact that mu h converges to mu weakly, you will deduce that the number of eigenvalues, which are larger than A minus epsilon, grows linearly in n. So in particular, the largest eigenvalue is at least the A minus epsilon. Okay, and the limit of your eigenvalue, largest eigenvalue is A. Also, from the fact that you have the number of eigenvalues larger than A minus epsilon goes linearly, you deduce that for any epsilon, if you take your k even large enough, the trace of h power k will be at least n power n minus epsilon power k. Okay. So now we will turn to an upper bound of lambda 1. Okay, so assume that you can prove the converse upper bound of converse of the bound on the trace that I just given. So that the trace of h power k is bounded by n power a plus epsilon to the k, where k is even. Then you deduce that the largest eigenvalue is at least n power 1 over k times a plus epsilon. Okay. And as I said earlier, if k is much larger than log n power 1 over k will go to 0, will go to 1, sorry. And you will deduce an information on lambda 1. So if your matrix is random, if you can prove that for some epsilon which go to 0, the expectation of trace of h power k is bounded by n times a plus epsilon power k, then you will automatically deduce that the almost sure limit of lambda 1 is at least a. Okay, that's the principle. And so in summary, if you have k fixed, the normalized trace of h to the k will give you the access to the limit of the empirical spectral distribution. And for large k, your estimates on the expected trace will give you information on the operator norm. Okay, so I was always giving a lim sup and liminf in these statements, but you can make very precise translative bounds, which I will not do here. You can replace the monomial h to the k by other sequence of polynomials. We see one example of that in 2 days, probably. The method of the trace method for fixed k in the very first paper of Figner on random matrices. He used this method, or probably introduced it. And the fact of the idea to study I trace to the Euclid formation on the operator norm was done for the first time to my knowledge by Furiel and Komlosh in 81. Okay. So in most of what remains, I will give you the original proof of Figner of the semicircular law. So probably most of you have seen it, but I will use this proof to introduce some definitions, and it will be useful for the sequel. In my opinion, the proof of the semicircular law with moments is quite difficult, and every time I make the exercise of writing this proof formally, it's not an easy task. So its appearance, it's not the Furiel and Komlosh arguments, which is the I-trace methods, is in some sense easier, has some parts which are much easier than the one that I will present now. Okay, so we consider Figner matrices of this type. So entries above the diagonal are independent. We'll assume that the entries are bounded by 1 over q. Okay, so this scalar q, as I will tell you in the next line, we will think of it as something which controls the sparsity of the matrix H. And I will also assume that the variance of all entries is 1 over n. And also the entries are centered. Okay, so this is, we call that ensemble of matrices, the sparse Figner matrices. Okay, so a comment on why do I call this parameter Q sparse? The sparsity parameter. Okay, let's take a matrix with entries 0 or 1, so independent Bernoulli, and the probability that your entry is 1 is d over n. Okay, so what you obtain here, A is the adjacency matrix of a Merdo-Schoeni random graph. So this is a graph of n vertices where you put your edges independent at random, and the probability of putting an edge is d over n. Okay, d is less than n. Okay, so the average degree, which is the expected number of vertices which are connected to another vertex, it's essentially d. Okay. And d over n is the variance of the entries. Okay, up to a small correction. Okay, so if you consider the renormalized matrix H, where you recenter the Bernoullis and you divide by square root of d, or d prime, where d prime is, okay, it's almost d, then you obtain exactly a matrix which is a sparse Figner matrices. So the variance of diagonal entry is 1 over n, and the entries are bounded by 1 over square root of D prime. Okay, well, so the parameter, the sparsity parameter Q is simply the square root of the average degree. So, and of course, so it explains why Q is the sparsity parameter. So when you have renormalized your entry so that the variance is 1 over n, the parameter 1 over Q can be thought as the larger Q is, the more spread out, the less sparse your matrix is. Okay. So in this case, you need also to recenter the matrix by expectation of the entries. So, and this expectation is simply T over n times G minus identity, where G is matrix with all entries equal to 1. Okay, so I will not speak a lot about perturbation inequalities, because this is not the topic of this course. But this operation of truncation, recentering, and so on, there are a lot of inequalities or perturbation bounds which allows you to deduce information from the matrix we started with, from information on your recentered, rescaled matrix. I will just mention 2 inequalities. But if you have 2 Hermitian matrices A and B, if their rank is of their difference is R, then the eigenvalues are interlaced with a shift of R indices. Okay, so lambda I of A, the i's largest eigenvalue of A, is upper bounded by the I minus R eigenvalues of B. Another inequality is the Huffman-Gilland inequality, which tells you that the sum of the square of the difference. So if you see the lambda i's as a vector in Rn, this is the square of the Euclidean norm between the vector of eigenvalues of A minus the vector of eigenvalues of B. It's bounded by the trace of A minus B squared, which is the square of the Frobenius norm. So for example, so this can be used to compare the recenter variable. So for the Erdős-Süni graph, for example, if H is my recentered and rescaled matrix, you can, when you test the empirical spectral distribution of mu H against the function phi, it's essentially the same as testing this test function against the measure A divided by square root D. And the error you make is either further 1 over n. Okay. So here is a simulation for when I take n to be 1000, and I consider 2 settings where the degree is 20, the average degree is 20, and the average degree is 5. So we see that the empirical spectral distribution do not look alike. So we will prove that but as soon as the sparsity parameter Q goes to infinity, you are in the regime of the Wigner semicircular order. So, so more precisely, so I take my centered Hermitian matrix with the same hypothesis as before. So they are bounded by 1 over Q, and the variance is always 1 over n. So here I have included the diagonal, but you can remove it by using these truncation arguments. And then the circle law, the theorem of Wigner asserts that as soon as Q goes to infinity, the limit of the empirical spectral distribution is the semicircular distribution. So for Erdős-Rényi graph, Q is the square root of the degree. Okay. So I will try to give you a proof of this theorem using moments. So the main step will be to prove the following lemma. That the moments, the expected trace of the moments renormalized converge to the moments of the semicircular law. So the first thing you should do is to compute the moments of the semicircular law. So the measure is symmetric. So all moments are 0. And the even moments are given by the Catalan number. So the Catalan numbers are famous numbers which are known for counting many different objects in combinatorics. We will see the proof at the end. We will use a bijection argument, and we will see one of the combinatorial objects which is counted by the Catalan number. Okay, so we start with extending the trace in terms of the entries of the coefficients. Okay, so we get that the normalized trace of the case power is a sum over all closed paths. So I will denote them by gamma. Okay, so they are closed paths, so the start point and the end point are the same. And this sum is weighted, and you weight each path as the expectation of the product of the weights of the matrix entries which are encountered by the path. Okay? Now, you associate to each path, closed path, a connecting graph. Okay, and this path will have, I will denote them by V gamma vertices and E gamma edges. Okay, so for the way you associate the graph to the path is kind of obvious. I've put an example where so you put an edge. The set of vertices are the set of indices of the path. Okay, so for example, here it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the set of edges are the set of pairs of matrix entries that you on the path. So here you visit twice, for example, the entry 1, 1. Okay, and I put a number on the edges, which are the time at which you visit this path. You visit this edge, so. Okay. So to each path, you associate a connected graph in a very natural way. Okay. So what we will do is to try to, we have a huge sum to deal with. We'll try to organize a little bit this sum in terms of the properties of this associated graph. Okay. First, let us estimate the weight of the path. So each edge is visited many times, and you can visit it in two directions. Okay, so it's ME plus and ME minus. Okay, so number of times that you visit XY, if your edge is the order paired XY, it will be the number of times that you visit xy, and the number of times that you visit yx. Then using the independence of the entries, you can write the product as a product over the edges of the graph of the expectation of the corresponding moments, where you have to take into account the fact that the matrix is Hermitian. So hxy is a complex conjugate of hyx. Okay, I hope everybody follows me up to now. You can use the assumption that the entries are centered. So this p gamma will be 0 if unless you see all edges, you visit all edges at least twice. Okay? So we'll only consider closed paths which visit each edge at least twice. Okay, so now we will use the fact, our assumption of the fact that the entries are bounded, and the fact that the variance is 1 over n. Okay, so you obtain that you have exactly, what you do is you in the expectation of the product, when you have the expectation of HE ME plus HE power ME minus, since the sum of the two coefficients is at least 2, you are able for each edge to have a factor 1 over n. For each edge, which comes from the fact that the variance is 1 over n. And all your moments, you just use the fact that the entries are bounded by 1 over q. Okay? And you obtain this first expression. Now, the paths that you consider are of length k, so the sum of the multiplicity of the edges is k. And you obtain this expression. Okay, so we have upper bounded the weights of each path in terms only on the number of edges visited. Okay, so simple comments. The fact that k is, since you visit each edge twice, okay, and e is at least 2, you deduce that the number of edges cannot be larger than k over 2. And when you will have equality, then k will be even. Okay. Another comment. If you visit each edge twice, but twice in the sense that you visit it once in each direction, you visit one xy and once yx, then necessarily k will be even, the number of edges will be k over 2, and the weight, the p gamma, will be exactly equal to n power minus k over 2. Okay? This is because the variance is exactly equal to 1 over n. Okay. This was for the contribution of the weight. Now we have to make some, to order the sets of all closed paths. For that, we introduce a natural equivalence relation between paths. We say that two paths are equivalent if they are the same up to a global permutation of the indices. Okay, an equivalent class, so this is an equivalence relation, and an equivalence class is in combinatorics world, it's called an unlabeled path. Okay, so you have just in your path you forget the value of the indices. the value of the indices were integers between 1 to n, but you discard this information. So what you get is a path without where the vertices are not labeled. So it is called an unlabeled path. Okay, so in each equivalence class, if you want to count the number of elements in an equivalence class, you just have to specify the value of the labels, the value of the vertices. So it's exactly the V gamma first terms in the development of the n factorial. Okay? So, and combining these two information, we can rewrite the expected trace in a compact way as follows. So we call WK the set of equivalence classes or unlabeled closed paths of length k, which visit each edge at least twice. And you get expect of the normalized trace of your matrix power k. Okay, so I've rewritten again this expression above here. So let's look at the exponents that we have here closely. So V gamma minus E gamma minus 1. This is the minus the Euler characteristic of the graph. Okay? The Euler characteristic of a graph is the number of edges minus the number of vertices plus 1. Okay? If the graph is connected, the Euler characteristics or genus is non-negative, and there will be an equality if and only if your graph is a tree. If you don't know this fact, I will give you some reference at the end, but it's a nice exercise to prove that. Okay, so we have an exponent here, n power V gamma minus E gamma minus 1, which goes to 0 if you're not a tree. And the second exponent, the q power minus k minus 2 E gamma, as we have already commented, you will remember that q goes to infinity. So you want to visit the maximal number of edges. You want to have E gamma equal to k over 2. Okay, so since q goes to infinity, you find the following expression for the trace. But in the trace, if since k is fixed, you can only keep track of the elements of the unlabeled path, such that the corresponding graph is a tree, and such that the number of visited edges is exactly q over 2. In particular, if k is odd, your normalized trace goes to 0, which is consistent with the fact that the semicircular law has vanishing if odd moments. Okay, another comment is that if you have a path which is which is each edge exactly twice, and which is a tree, then you must visit each edge once in each direction. Otherwise, your graph will contain a cycle. I've made a picture to try to make it clear. But if you visit the edge twice, as on the picture, then your graph is connected. When you exit from this point, when you exit from the right node, you must have a path which come back to your original vertex. So there will be a cycle. So as we have already seen, when you visit each edge once in each direction, the weight is simply n power minus k over 2. So on the overall, we have checked that the normalized moments is simply the cardinal number of the number of these unlabeled graphs, unlabeled paths, sorry, which visit each edge exactly twice, and such that the corresponding graph is a tree. Okay, so this set does not depend on n, at least when n is larger than k. Okay, because it's unlabeled vertices. Okay, so what remains to do is to take k even and to prove that the cardinal number of this set is given by the Catalan number. For that, we built a bijection between this set and a set which is known to count Catalan number, to be counted by Catalan number. Okay, so first we take a representative element in each of the equivalence classes. In other words, even our elements are unlabeled paths, but we will label, we find a canonical way to label the vertices. The rule is very simple. You use the 5 at gamma. You interpret the successive coefficients, the successive vertices visited by gamma. You think of that as a process, a time. So the first visited vertex, you call it 1, and when you visit a new vertex, you will give it a label which is just 1 plus the largest label visited so far. Okay? So for example, if the path is 1, 2, 1, 3, 4, 3, 1, this is canonical. Okay, because you start from 1, then you visit 2, then you will visit 3 and 4 and so on. Okay? Another property is that, as you can see in the example, either at a given time t, either gamma t is visited for the first time, so it's a new vertex, or the edge on which you are, gamma t minus 1 gamma t, is the last edge which has been visited once. Only once, only one. Okay, so you can, otherwise there will be a cycle. Okay, so there is a picture of that. Okay, so for example, in my example, when I am at 3, the only way, either from 3, either I could visit a new vertex, or I had to go back to 1. Okay, there were no other choices. Okay, so this property allows me to draw a bijection between my canonical paths and what are called deep paths. So I will do the map one way. So I take an element, a canonical element, gamma, in my n-level closed path of length k, which visits each edge exactly twice. I associate a path of the same length, which starts at 0, and which increase by 1. X plus 1 minus xt is plus 1. If gamma t plus 1 is a new vertex, and minus 1 otherwise. Okay, so I taken the same example on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side, I have drawn the corresponding path seen as a function from 0, k. Okay, so it's an integer value function. So let's start. You start from, let's say, 0. Then you visit vertex 2. It's a new vertex. You do plus 1. Then you come back to 1. It's not a new vertex, so you do minus 1. You visit 3, which is a new vertex, so you do plus 1. Then you visit 4. It's a new vertex, plus 1. And then you visit 3 and 1, which are not new vertex. So you do minus 1 twice. Okay. So if I give you, it's a bijection, meaning that if I give you the curve, the path on the right-hand side, you can construct back the canonical path. Okay. Every time that you see a new every time that you see a plus 1, you create a new vertex, and when you see a minus 1, what you do is you close your path by just going to the last visited edge. To the last you use the last visited edge, which has only been visited exactly once. Okay, so this is a bijection. And if you think about it, the image of this map will be exactly the set of dig paths, which are the sets which start at 0 and end at 0, and such that which remain positive, non-negative, sorry, and which has steps of size plus and minus 1. The fact that it remains positive, it's from the fact that when you go down, you do minus 1. It means that you visit back an edge which has visited exactly once. So if you go down, it means that you have been up by 1 previously. So since it's a bijection, you deduce that the number of canonical paths that we were constructing is exactly the number of dig paths. Okay. I will not prove that the number of dig paths is counted by the Catalan number. I will give you a reference, but it's a very nice exercise to do. I encourage you strongly to do it. It's very nice. And there are many proofs. You can either prove directly that the number of dig paths is the number, so k choose k plus 1, so 2k choose k minus 2k choose k minus 1 by a direct combinatorial or a combinatorial argument, or you can use the fact that the Catalan number have a recursion formula and prove the same recursion formula for the dig path. Okay. So we have proved so far, or I have sketched you the proof that the expectation of the empirical spectral distribution converge to the semicircular law by the method of moments. So what we meant to check is that the expectation of the spectral measure is close to its that it concentrates. the spectral measure is close to its expectation. Okay, so there is two ways to check that. Either you repeat the combinatorial arguments I've given you for the first moment and do it for the second moment of the expectation of the trace. Okay? In this case, I skip all details, but you will obtain that the variance of 1 over n trace of h to the k is of order 1 over n over q squared. When I say is of order, the underlying constant depends on k. Okay? So in particular, since q goes to infinity, or even since q is bounded, the variance goes to 0. Okay, so you will deduce that the moments concentrate, so the spectral measure concentrates around its mean. And you will obtain a first proof of the Wigner semicircular law. Okay, the second possibility is to use concentration inequalities. There are many different ways to apply concentration inequalities in the context of random matrices. One is the following. If you use the Azuma-Hövding inequality, okay, so if you don't know what is the Azuma-Hövding inequality, I will, you can look at, for example, at the book of Boucheron, Lugosi, Massard, which I forgot to quote. But, okay. So there is a general concentration inequalities, but you will use in conjunction with rank inequality, which I have given you previously. And what you will obtain is that on any test function, which has a total variation norm, which is the integral of the absolute value of the derivative at most 1, you will obtain that the integral of the spectral measure deviates is exponentially unlikely to deviate for its mean with a parameter which would be like n t squared. Okay? So of course, this will give you the concentration that you are looking for. You can obtain, in fact, stronger concentration inequalities because this concentration inequality only use very few independence properties of the matrices, and in fact do not even depend on the fact that the matrices are bounded. Okay, if you use the Huffman-Wieland inequality, which was these inequalities relating the difference of the sum of the squares of the eigenvalues in terms of the trace of the difference of the squares of the entries. If you use this in conjunction with the Talagrand concentration inequality, we'll obtain that if your function is Lipschitz and is convex, or has a finite number of inflection points, you will obtain a deviation inequalities which will be of order exponential minus n q squared t squared, which is stronger and which is consistent with the bound on the variance which I've given you before of order 1 over n q squared. Okay? So both approach will give you the full Wigner semicircular law. Some final remarks. You can extend the same proof to inhomogeneous Wigner matrices which have a constant or row variances. So the center matrices, and the L2 norm of the matrices, the square of the entries is 1. Then you will obtain, if Q goes to infinity, the Wigner semicircular law. If Q does not go to infinity, then the semicircular law may not hold. For example, you can consider the Erdős-Schuny graph with average degree D. Well, I remember that D is square root Q in this case. Then the spectral measure will converge to a probability measure which depends on D. Okay, so there is no universal law in the regime where in the sparsity regime where the average number of non-zero entries is of order 1. Okay, so to conclude this first lecture, so the original proof of Wigner is exactly is almost what I have presented to you. It's this fifth paper in 55. If you want a more modern treatment of the same proof, you can look at the book by Anderson, Dionys, and Itoune. You will also find concentration inequalities. And I have also lecture notes on my webpage that you will find on where I've written essentially the proof I presented to you and the concentration inequalities. So next time, we'll look at higher moments. So we'll take care of the dependencies in K of all the constants. And you will see it will be less combinatorial, meaning that there will be no bijection and things like that. And in fact, so in some sense, the arguments will be simpler. And we'll revisit the original proof of Curie and Cohn-Loach, but the largest eigenvalue for the operator norm converge for linear matrices. Okay, so thank you. This is everything I wanted to say for the first course.